Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Roots Podcast. Over the last few videos, I've talked a lot about what happened during these various Spanish expeditions that happened, across North America and even across the Pacific in the Philippines. In this episode, I want to talk about what it was like to be on an expedition. Many of these explorers and conquistadors, they encountered a lot of dangerous scenarios. So let's go ahead and talk about that. When you were on these expeditions, oftentimes, you found yourself marching across a desert or through a jungle or even across a mountain range. Every single one of these scenarios has its own peculiar dangers. During their journeys, the conquistadors and their indigenous allies relied on a combination of careful planning, resourcefulness, and local knowledge to secure food and water. They would carry provisions such as dried meat, corn, and beans, which were easily preserved and transported. Along the way, they would also forage for wild fruits, roots, and edible plants. And they would hunt local game, like small rabbits and other critters to supplement their food supplies. The indigenous allies, with their intimate understanding of the land, that also played a crucial role in identifying safe and abundant sources of water, such as rivers, springs, and wells, as well as guiding the group to places where they could replenish their food supplies. The indigenous allies also helped to facilitate trade with friendly indigenous communities and also, to seek out friendly indigenous communities. In many cases, the conquistadors and their indigenous allies could march for an entire day and then spend the evening with a friendly community and then, begin their march again the following morning. In that famous book by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain, it describes a very vivid scene in which the conquistadors and their indigenous allies reached the town of Sautla. As they arrived in Sautla, the conquistadors were greeted by the local cacique. The cacique is like the village chieftain. And the cacique, he welcomed Cortés warmly and extended his hospitality to Cortez's men. In the evening, the villagers prepared a feast for their visitors. The air was filled with the enticing aroma of corn, beans, and simmering meats. The conquistadors found the food satisfying and delicious, and it helped to lift their spirits after days of hardships while marching on the road. Diaz goes on to describe that the cacique, whose name was Olintecle, provided 20 of his best warriors to join Cortez's army. While marching from Veracruz to Tenochtitlan, the conquistadors would have encountered various dangerous animals native to the diverse ecosystems of Mexico. Some of the potentially dangerous animals they might have encountered were jaguars. These large cats inhabit the dense forests and jungles of Mexico. These are very large predators, and they're capable of taking down very large prey. Pumas, you probably wore those shoes in high school. Well, those are also mountain lions. And those mountain lions inhabit the forests of Mexico and the mountainous regions. Though they typically avoid humans, pumas can be very dangerous if they perceive a threat. There were also poisonous snakes. Mexico is home to several species of venomous snakes, such as rattlesnakes, coral snakes, and the Mexican lancehead viper. A bite from one of these snakes could be fatal if not treated properly. There were also scorpions. Mexico has tons of scorpions, especially in the Mexican state of Durango. Some of these species have very powerful venom that's potent enough to even kill you. Encounters with such scorpions could occur while traveling across Mexico's desert regions or while handling rocks or wood or other material where they could be hiding. There were also very venomous spiders. Now, these aren't as deadly as the movies want you to think they are, but they are still very painful if you get bitten by one. And some of these dangerous spiders include the brown recluse and the black widow. And there are various other types of insects that the conquistadors would have encountered. This includes mosquitoes and ticks, which can cause diseases like malaria and Lyme disease. One of the interesting ironies of history is that the conquistadors, their descendants stayed in the Americas, and eventually they developed resistance to tropical diseases, especially diseases like, malaria. And so during the Wars of Independence in the 1800s, the criollos, they were European. They were of Spanish ancestry, but they were born in the Americas and their families had been there for hundreds of years. They were resistant to these tropical diseases. And so when Spanish troops came from Europe and arrived in South America, they would die very easily from these tropical diseases. And so it's estimated that more European Spaniards died from diseases such as malaria, the yellow fever, dysentery, cholera, etc. They died more from those diseases than they did on the battlefield fighting Spanish criollos who were born in the Americas. And for a conquistador marching over a mountain range during the 16th century exploration and conquest of the Americas, the journey would have been a physically and mentally challenging ordeal. The experience would have been marked by harsh terrain, extreme weather, and a host of other difficulties. Difficult terrain, traversing mountain ranges would have involved navigating steep slopes, rocky outcrops, and narrow paths. Conquistadors would have had to maintain their balance and remain vigilant to avoid falls and injuries, which of course would have resulted in death had they fallen from such heights. There was also cold and unpredictable weather. Mountain weather can be highly unpredictable, with sudden storms, strong winds, and freezing temperatures posing significant challenges. Conquistadors who might have been more accustomed to the warmer climate of Spain would have had to endure these harsh conditions, often with limited or inadequate clothing and equipment. Or what about limited food and water? Crossing a mountain range often meant that conquistadors had to carry their own supplies, as food and water sources could be scarce at high altitudes. The physical exertion of the journey, combined with limited rations, could have led to fatigue, hunger, and dehydration. I mean, just think about it. Imagine if you were, marching through a mountain and you had to carry your own supplies. Most conquistadors were not wealthy people, so the little money they had, in many cases, they had spent it on the supplies that they were going to take on their journey. So once their supplies were gone, in many cases, that's all. They had nothing else to fall back on. But what about life on a Spanish ship during the 16th and 17th centuries? Sailors and soldiers and passengers on these voyages faced a range of difficulties, including cramped living conditions, as well as limited food and water supplies, diseases, and the dangers of storms and navigation. You could get lost at sea. The lack of fresh fruits and vegetables often led to nutritional deficiencies, such as scurvy. Water supplies could also become contaminated or run out, and that would force the crew to ration their consumption or rely on having to collect rainwater. Also, having a crew crammed on a ship for months at a time, that led to disciplinary issues and conflict amongst the crew. Spain is a very culturally diverse place. People from, southern Spain are different than Basques, and people from Galicia are different than people from Asturias. So this oftentimes led to cultural conflicts on board. And so Spanish ship captains who are actually good at their jobs, they would have to enforce strict discipline on their crews. And that included punishments for disobedience or insubordination. And this could be pretty severe, ranging from flogging, which basically meant having them whipped, all the way to execution. It was not unusual for a captain to order an execution. Even Cortés ordered a few executions of his own men for insubordination. In most cases, execution was reserved for the most severe cases of treachery. So I think that's enough for today. I'm going to go ahead and close the conversation right there. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you all again next week.